Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
We know that the post-Cold War world order has been changing in the past 10 years. Lately, the change has become more rapid. Yet, there is no doubt which the two most powerful countries in the world are. America, still by some distance, and then China. That's why sometimes I call one the superpower or a declining superpower, the other the rising deputy superpower. But which is the third most powerful country in the world? So think, that's a trick question. Of course, we think India is the best. But that besides, leave patriotism aside for a moment. Which is the third most powerful or important country in the world? Is it Britain? No. Is it France? No. Is it even the EU? No, because EU is so divided also, and also in many ways in decline. What other country is there? Can it be South Korea? Can it be Pakistan? Can it be Iran, Saudi Arabia? None. The third most powerful and important country in the world today, it's quite a surprise. In fact, when you think about it, it's not such a surprise, is Russia, the Russian Federation. And how does that happen? And it is that country that we seem to study the least of all. We seem to study the least of all. We think about the least of all. If you look at our media, we have the least coverage on Russia. Now, many of you in the past have asked me to speak about Russia, Putin. One reason I've been hesitant is because I don't know enough about Russia. And also, I've been diffident because I needed more convincing in my head instinctively about how important and powerful Russia is. But lately, as we have seen Russia feature back in American politics, we spoke about something Russia did or allegedly did just the other day, which is offering bounties to the Taliban to kill American soldiers and their coalition fighters. So Russia now, once again, is reminding us that it paints big time on the global power radar screen. Now, it does punch way above its weight, and we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But we first must understand what is this Russia and what is the power structure there and what is this remarkable man called Vladimir Putin. And the reason we talk about this today is also that just a couple of days back, he had his constitutional amendment, his remarkable constitutional amendment. I think it's the most remarkable constitutional amendment that after, at least in terms of what I have seen, after what Zia implemented in Pakistan, followed by a referendum. So Putin also brought in a constitutional amendment and followed it up with a referendum. He had his lower house clear that amendment in no time, in a jiffy, like a knife going through butter. Then he had his constitutional court clear it. Nobody fights with Putin. Nobody stands in way because Putin's principle is, jo humse takrayega, chur chur ho jayega. People have been shot, people have been jailed, people have been exiled. People haven't lived long enough to tell the tale. He's a tough guy. And yet he maintains this facade of democracy of getting elected. So he got himself a referendum. What did that referendum do? And which is the reason that Narendra Modi called him yesterday, that is on Thursday, to congratulate him on that referendum and constitutional amendment. The original constitution of Russia, as enacted or proclaimed in 1993, we all know the changes Russia went through after 89 when the Cold War ended, Soviet Union broke up, a Russian Federation emerged out of it. There was a lot of chaos, and then you had Yeltsin, etc., etc. In 93, a new democratic constitution was proclaimed in Russia. That constitution limited the president, who's the chief executive, to 2 terms, 2 consecutive terms, no more, just like America's constitution. Putin, who was until 1991 with the KGB, he was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB. His last posting was in East Germany, and he saw the decline of the communist power under his watch. I think he was pretending to be, his cover in East Germany was that of a translator, but he was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB. So he quit the KGB, he joined politics in St. Petersburg. Then when Yeltsin took over, because he had joined politics, Yeltsin called him to Moscow and made him the head of his FSB, Federal Security Bureau, which was the successor of KGB. So at a very young age, in his 40s, Putin became the intelligence czar of the new Russia. Again, he rose to power. By 1909, he had become Prime Minister of Russia under Yeltsin. You will see a graphic, you will see these dates running on the screen. You will also see this graphically explained to you all these twists and turns over these 20 plus years, which I call twists and turns of the rise and rise of Vladimir Putin. Because with every twist and turn, he only rose. So 1999, December 31, Yeltsin quit and Putin took over as president, as officiating president. A few months later, in the national election, he won with 53% vote and became the president. Then the president's term was for 4 years. So he ruled for 4 years. His prime minister then was Mikhail Kasyanov. I will mention these names to you, although I suspect you may not have either heard of these names or you may have forgotten about them. Because in any case, under him, the prime minister is a forgettable job. I will also come to you in a minute and tell you why under him, even the president is a forgettable job, which is a double twist. So Mikhail Kasyanov was his prime minister. He ruled for 4 years, Putin. In 2004, he had a fresh election in which now he got a majority of 71%. He had turned around the Russian economy. Russian economy had been suffering from a massive decline. There was a lot of distress after the end of the Cold War and instability and the breakup. He put it back together. And there was also, from 2000 onwards, there was a big commodities boom globally. And Russia is a big commodities, materials power. And that led to a Russian boom. Once again, we'll show you a graphic showing how economy has performed under Putin. But you will see a set of two graphics, one showing you how the economy has performed under him. It shot up in his first term, so it got him a second term with 71% vote. After that, it hasn't been doing so well lately. Then it declined. In fact, the last time Soviet economy rose at more than 5% was 2012-13. After that, it's also had years of decline, and that was before COVID came in. So his last 5-7 years, he's ruined Russia's economy. Russia's economy has now become completely dependent on oil prices and commodity prices. Yet, his power has only increased, which is the story we are trying to tell you. So 2004, he won his second election. He now appointed another prime minister, Mikhail Fradkov. Again, somebody either we haven't heard of or we have forgotten. In 2005, he gave a very important speech at the Kremlin. At that speech, he said that breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest political catastrophe of the 20th century. And then he said that that breakup virus, he didn't say virus, I'm using virus because that's fashionable these days, that breakup virus had infected Russia as well. You know what he was responding to? He was responding to Chechnya and other stuff, because he also rose as a Russian irredentist. That's how he reached out and he grabbed Crimea. So that is an insight into his personality that speech gave. In 2008, he came up for his third term. Now he had a problem because the constitution of Russia, the 1993 constitution, did not allow for a third term. So how does Mr. Vladimir Putin get himself a third term while he cannot have a third term? Can he retire and go home? Those are not things that people do in their early 40s anywhere. Maybe only in America. So Obama, Clinton could do those things, but not Mr. Putin. So what does he do? He says, all right, I will no longer be president. Constitution says I can't be president. But Constitution can't say I can't be prime minister. So I'll be prime minister. Who will be my president? His president, after Fradkov, he had appointed Dmitry Medvedev as his prime minister. young Dmitry Medvedev. So he said, Beta, don't worry, you want a promotion, I will give you a promotion, right? So he now had Dmitry Medvedev appointed president of Russia, his own prime minister, and he said, I will work under my president, I am the prime minister. Everybody knew where the power was. So for 4 years, he became prime minister of Russia. All the power shifted to him, and he had a president in the name of Dmitry Medvedev. In fact, then The Economist magazine had a brilliant cover story on this and a brilliant cover visual that showed Putin sort of sitting like this, his full bust in his jacket, and the headline saying, I am Prime Minister, meet my president. And the president was a tiny passport size picture of Medvedev in the pocket of his shirt or his jacket. So he converted the prime minister into president, president into prime minister, and in the process kept power with himself. So once again, a very creative person as well. So I don't know how many of you play chess, but if you play chess, in chess there is a move called castling. You castle when a side basically reverses the position of its king and its rook. Rook is what in Hindi we call hathi. So in Russia, this was called a move of castling, which in Russian language is called rokirovka. Now, you know, Russians are great at chess, Boris Spassky, etc., etc. You remember them, Garry Kasparov. In fact, I interviewed him once in 1990 in Moscow. He's a dissident. He's a Putin dissident also. So the country of chess grandmasters, where chess grandmasters grow out of any street corner, they called it rokirovka, which means castling. So basically, the rook took the pretense of being the king, and the king took the pretense of being the rook. Now, I can't presume that all of us know chess, so I can explain what happened between Putin and Medvedev in terms of castling, which is exchanging your, not exchanging, but basically switching your king for your rook. But at least all of us know the Rabri Devi Lalu Yadav story. So what happened there? Lalu Yadav decided that he could no longer be chief minister because he had to go to jail. So he made Rabri Devi the chief minister. And she kept sending the files to him in jail. So Putin didn't have to go to jail, but he, quote unquote, demoted himself to prime minister, elevated Medvedev as if he was his Rabri Devi into president. And so the files still kept coming to him. So that is exactly what happened. So the gentleman had 4 more years of power, and as 4 years were ending in 2012, around that time, Medvedev, as the president, did 2 things. One, he proposed the name again of Putin as the candidate for presidency, because Constitution only said he can't be president for 2 consecutive terms. It didn't say he can't be president for a 3rd term later. So now he has done his 4 years on the side of his cooling period. Remember, that's the kind of nonsensical rule that Supreme Court of India made for BCCI, that anybody who is an office bearer then has to have a cooling period somewhere for a certain number of years before he or she can come back and be an official. So Putin, I'm the player, I make the rules, I'm the umpire, I'm the commentator. So he changed the rules. His president now, Medvedev, asked his prime minister to be the presidential candidate. And what is the second thing Medvedev did? The second thing he did as president was, he said that now on, the term of the presidency will not be 4 years, but 6 years. So 6 more years Putin got. So that became 6 years from 2012 to 2018, and Medvedev went back to being the prime minister, the faithful prime minister of President Putin once again. It's quite remarkable. In 2018, a fresh election was held, and again you will see on my screen how his vote percentage is changing over these years. He's not showing any signs of lack of popularity. In 2018, he won yet another term, which made him president till 2024. Now that is very painful. That's very boring for him to realize at 2024 that he's now done 2 double terms as president. Now, if he has to work on the same constitution, does he again want to? Does he again want one more round of castling, make someone else his president, make himself prime minister, and come back? So it's so boring. Why take such a chance? So he decided to further amend the constitution because after all, he's 67 now. In 2024, when his second 6-year term ends or his fourth term as president ends, he will only be 73. Imagine, in our country, Morarji Desai became prime minister at 81. Manmohan Singh served as prime minister till 82. So why should he retire and go home at 73? And he's so fit. You've seen him bearing his torso and I don't know which martial art, but I think he has a bunch of black belts as well. He's a fit guy, former colonel in the KGB. He knows his stuff, looks after himself. So he decided to amend his constitution. It was quite dramatic in January. He said he was going to amend his constitution. First, the changes he announced looked quite innocuous. He said, first of all, with the new amendments, Parliament will have more power. 2, future presidents will be confined to 2 terms and no more. And 3rd, a state council will be set up as an advisory body which will have more power. Jan 15, he announced this. And Mr. Medvedev, once again, he's the most cooperative prime minister in the history of any system pretending to be a democracy. So he resigned as well. He resigned and he appointed a new prime minister, whose name we just mentioned to you, Mikhail Mishustin. He seems to have a preference for Mikhail. 3 of his 4 prime ministers have been Mikhail. So Mikhail Mishustin, and what was he doing until then? He was the head of Russia's tax service. The chief taxman, obviously he had the stuff on everybody. All the rich people, all the powerful people. So he became the new prime minister. So initially, everybody expected that this was his way, Putin's way of perpetuating his rule forever. But these amendments did not show that. What he did, on the other hand, is on March 10, dramatically, he came up with further amendments to the amendment, which said that on presidents after 2024, no such limitations will apply, which means he can then carry on at least till 2036. And you know what? 2036, he will only be 83 years old and a fit 83 years old. Mr. Advani, until a couple of years back, was still hoping that he could become prime minister, well into his 80s. So why not Putin? So you might have somebody who will be president for life. So in fact, many of his chamchas or chapus in the Russian political system are now saying he should declare himself president for life. You know what? If he serves till 2036, which seems to be the likely scenario right now, he would have ruled Russia for longer than Stalin. He will still take a decade longer, 11 years longer to beat Peter the Great. Peter the Great had served for 43 years. But if he carries on till 36, he would have been president of Russia for 32 years. That's longer than Stalin. So that's the kind of phenomenon that you are looking at. And then he put this new amendment to a referendum and got, you know, how much vote? 73% of the vote. So I see a lot of snarky comments everywhere in Western media saying, what will happen to what is the fate of the remaining 27%? Baki sabka kya hoga? It happened like this. I think Zia got something like 99 or some percent votes in his referendum. So everybody said what will happen to the few who chose not to cast their vote for him. So this was one of those absurd things that happened. And then with his amendments, he has come up with some new things because those give you an idea of his ideology. One, with his new amendments, he has banned gay marriage. He has banned gay marriage. He has also criminalized any propaganda, quote unquote, any propaganda for promotion of homosexuality. Think. Second, he has said ceding any Russian territory in future by any ruler will not be allowed. Now, what is Russian territory? He's obviously defining. I haven't read very much on it, but I read this as meaning that it means that Ukraine and the rest of the world have to forget Crimea. if not more than that. His Chechen problem he had sorted out. He'd held a referendum there, and the Chechen leader now is the guy who I said is his chamcha in chief. Third, he said Russian language will be the language of everybody in Russia. So, linguistic chauvinism as well. And fourth, he said that criticism, any criticism of what the Russians called Great Patriotic War or the Second World War under Stalin, any criticism of that war is now illegal. It is a criminal offense. So, what you see in these new changes, you can see the strands of the new ideology that he has built for Russia. That ideology is actually widely acknowledged as Putinism. So, just as you had Stalinism, now he has Putinism. So, Putinism, this ideology, basically political ideology, is ultra conservative Russian nationalism. It's also defined sort of in more scientific terms as concentration of political and financial power with what is called as Sloviks, Sloviks. Sloviks literally means people with shoulder marks, which means people with rank badges. So this is an elite of former armed forces, KGB, police, etc., who came with him, who concentrate all this power amongst themselves. They are the Sloviks, and they are the elite that controls the power. So, in fact, it was Arnold Beichmann, Beichman, and you should Google him. He was a lifelong campaigner against communism in America. He used to work at Hoover Institution. He died in 2010 at the ripe old age of 97. So he gave Putinism this definition that I just used. He said Putinism is the Stalinism of 21st century. Now the ironical thing is that while you might say that Putinism is the Stalinism of 21st century, quite rightly, Putin actually is no lover of communism. In fact, he had said very early on when communism was falling and Gorbachev was bringing about the changes, he said then on that he decided which side he was going to be on. And in 1999, he made a speech where he said, communism is a blind alley far away from mainstream of civilization. This quote I have got from David Remnick's article in New Yorker in 2014, headline, Watching the Eclipse. You will see many of these links with today's description. You can see that. So somebody who dropped communism, built his own kind of klepto-capitalism. Russia is now a kleptocracy for all practical purposes. A klepto-capitalism fought the oligarchs who had come up before him. Again, you are either with us or against us, and if you're against us, you might end up in a place you don't want to be, like the bottom of a river or with a bullet in your heart or something. So he got these oligarchs around him and concentrated his power in his new national capitalism, not national socialism, in his own national capitalism around his personality cult. Now, if that is how it happens, in fact, he has some opposition there, Namka Vaste, Alexei Navalny, who's opposition leader. He said what he's carried out by way of this amendment is revolting, vile, disgusting. And he has also said that he's got lots of people like artists, creative classes campaigning for him. And he's called them revolting, he's called them lying and cheating people who are doing it only for money. Nevertheless, this deed is now done. Now, why did he have to do it? First of all, his popularity had been falling. So, a state polling agency called VT-Siom, I don't know how to pronounce it, VT-SIOM, they showed in a recent poll that popular trust levels in Putin had fallen to 28%. Again, he had handled COVID very badly. He was complacent, and then the cases really shot up. Once the cases shot up, I must say, he has then conducted a large number of tests, which explains a large number of cases, positive cases in Russia. It's also an important thing, and we had spoken about it earlier once, that in Russia, fatality rate as a percentage of overall infections is much lower than the rest of the world. Now, if he's so powerful, if Putin's so powerful, why does he even need the facade of a referendum and a constitutional amendment? He can just declare himself the new czar, the ruler for life. So again, we have some readings, and you will have those readings in the links. Andrei Kolesnikov, who's a fellow at Carnegie Moscow Center, who says Putin is using the referendum to make ordinary people accomplices in extending his rule and sanctioning the domination of an ultra conservative ideology. And Greg Yudin, who's a theorist at Moscow School of Social and Economic Sciences, he says from a juridical point of view, this whole exercise is insane, but it is to get Putin legitimacy. It is theater, but very important and well played theater. This vote is putting Putin's theatrical techniques to test. So, in fact, there's another article by Andrew Higgins in the New York Times that I'm sharing with you, Theatrical Method to Putin's Madness. Another couple of scholars, Sharon Rivera and Henry Hale of the Hamilton College and George Washington University, they've written in an article in Washington Post, again, which I'm sharing with you. They say Putin sits atop a power pyramid containing many rival networks that operate behind the scenes. Each is bound to a political patronage network. So what happens is when you have all these power networks under you, and you sit on top of the pyramid, you know that there is a lot of politics and there is a lot of ambition and clash of ambitions among all these groups under you. So as long as they know that you are not going away anywhere, they stay disciplined. But if they start thinking you are vulnerable, then people start scheming. So this is a usual old Machiavellian or Cotillon way of managing a darbar. Be suspicious of everybody, but don't give anybody a chance of thinking that the emperor is weakening at any point of time. Now, what kind of power has Putin made Russia out to be? First of all, you can see that he might have set up an ultra-conservative new nationalism and new ideology, much as he might hate communism. His instincts are Cold War instincts. His instincts are of Cold War Soviet Union or from his KGB training. So he's still a Cold Warrior, which is why he's basically, as we say in the Hindi heartland, sabke fate mein tang ada raha hai. He is going into and getting involved in every messy situation in the world. So look at the places where he's got Russia involved: Syria, Libya, Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and now even Afghanistan. So give him trouble, and he'll see sex appeal in getting Russia involved there. And remember, in all these cases, he's gone and he's wrestled with Western power, which is essentially American power, and he's defeated it. So once again, he's fighting the old threat, America and NATO, as if in Cold War, in these funny places, and he's winning. Now, Assad is there, looks like very secure. In Libya, group that he's supporting seems to be winning. Venezuela, he saved the regime so much so that even Trump seems to be having a change of heart. So he's fighting this. And many experts say, and I agree with that he's making a mistake because he's so caught up with this Cold War formulation of NATO being his main enemy that he's forgetting that his threat is actually coming from his east, that is Xi Jinping. Because Xi Jinping is the one who's expanding into what used to be the earlier Soviet zone of influence. Xi Jinping is becoming the second most preeminent power in the world, now challenging America. Putin is actually helping Xi Jinping realize his big power dreams by guaranteeing endless supply of oil and gas from Russia to China over land borders, while Xi Jinping has to contend with American, Quad, other pressures in Indo-Pacific, and also his vulnerabilities over the Gulf of Malacca when it comes to oil supplies coming from the traditional sources. So Russia gives him, Xi Jinping, that strength. So there's an article in Financial Times by Philip Stephens who says that Putin's tactical mind is tactical, it is not strategic, and he suffers from Cold War nostalgia. Now, Cold War nostalgia means a couple of other things. Cold War nostalgia also means that Russia should continue to be a big, preeminent armament exporting power. If you look at Russia, it has maintained most of the military industrial complex of the Soviet times. But as an exporter, its stature in the world is now declining. So if you see the latest data from SIPRI, there's a March 9 report. SIPRI, Stockholm Institute of Peace, International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. Their report says that compared to 2010 and 14, between 2015 and 19, Russia's total armament exports to the world have fallen by 18%. So I have a reference from Alexandra Koimova, who's an expert at SIPRI, who says that even with India, Russian exports are down. India is traditionally the biggest buyer of Russian defense equipment, and that has not been compensated. That fall has not been compensated by the new exports that Russia is making to Egypt and Iraq. And she mentions that in the same period, America's defense exports have gone up 23%, and in 2015-19, America's defense exports were 76% higher than Russia. So once again, a declining power. But remember, it's a strange country. It is selling arms to China. It's selling arms to Russia. If push comes to the shove, there will be Sukhoi 30 ballpark aircraft from both China and India, both bought from Russia, battling it out in the skies. Both will be using some of the other similar systems. And China, if anything, has already deployed S-400 missiles in Ladakh. Those missiles India has now ordered. India will get its supplies only next year. So Russia has those powers. Now, how does Russia manage to punch way above its weight? Understand Russia's weight, and you will see one more graphic. And Russia's economic weight will tell you that it's a population of 14.5 crores. It has a total GDP of $1.6 trillion. That's a little, India will be a little less than twice as much. So this is about half of India's GDP. Of course, its population is 14.5 crores. So its per capita GDP is more than 5% higher than ours. Also slightly higher than China's. But China's GDP is 8 times Russia's. America's GDP is 14 times Russia's. EU's GDP is 12 times Russia's. France's GDP is 1.8 times Russia's. And yet, Russia commands such a power globally. How does that happen? So once again, there's an article from LSE blogs by Paul de Grauwe, who says that that's essentially because all of Europe does not see security as a collective thing. Each country in Europe sees defense, security, military power as its own sovereign function. So this is a Russia under Putin, armed with ultra-nationalism, a great military-industrial complex, the world's second best nuclear weapons, with the ability to go out and be activist in any problematic situation anywhere in the world without having to bother about any parliament, any congress, and with so much natural resources, which is now the third, surprisingly, by far, the third most powerful country in the world.